Good evening, all. Welcome to DSA with Python, day 6. In this session, we will discuss about classes and objects in Python, how classes are defined in Python, and how objects can be created in Python. So since these two topics are very important for implementing complex data structures like linked lists, trees, and graphs, today we will discuss the OOP concept, classes and objects in Python. So let me share the screen. So today's topic of discussion is objects and classes and objects in Python. Okay. So we know that Python is an object oriented programming language, and every object oriented programming language, okay, supports definition of classes and objects. Okay. So how these classes are defined in Python and how objects are created in Python, we will discuss today. So if we see the difference between object-oriented and procedure-oriented programming languages. So in procedure-oriented programming languages, the main emphasis is on defining the functions. Okay, so examples of procedure-oriented languages are C. Okay, so in C, main focus is on defining functions for each individual task. Whereas in object-oriented programming, the main focus is on objects. Okay, so everything we implement as object in object-oriented programming language. This is the main difference between procedure-oriented and object-oriented. So what is object? Object is a collection of data, variables, and methods, functions that act on that data. Okay, so if we see in real world, okay, so in real world everything is an object. Everything is an object. Like a person is an object, a car is an object. Okay, so you take anything, pen is an object. Everything is object, and things are getting done between these objects by communication. Okay, so a person 1 and person 2, both objects. Okay, so the things between person 1 person 2 is performed, okay, so by communication. Okay, so that means the works are performed, the tasks are performed between the objects in real world. Okay, so how we can identify that a person is an object, a thing in real world is an object? How we can uh, say that it is an object? Okay, so in real world, if you see, an object will have two characteristics. Every object will have two characteristics. So what are those two characteristics? Every object will have a state and behavior. If you talk about a real world object, okay, so every object will have state. Okay, so the state defines the features of the objects. Okay, so the state defines the features of the objects. Okay, so like say for example person, so person will have a name. Okay, person will have age. Okay, then person will have something like a bank balance, okay, or he has his own ID, Aadhaar ID. So these features defines the state of the object, and behavior means a person what kind of operations he performs. Okay, so a person can walk, okay, then a person can eat, okay, then a person can sleep. These are the operations performed by the person. Okay, so these operations defines the behavior of the object. Okay, so with the help of these two characteristics we identify objects in a real world. In real world objects, they have a state and a behavior. Okay, now the same we want to imitate in a object oriented programming language. That's how the object oriented concept has been developed. Okay, so that means in object oriented programming, everything, since in real world everything is performed between objects, so in object oriented programming also everything should be in the form of an object. Okay, so how in programming an object can be identified. Okay, so in programming an object can be identified because this real world object state and behavior we need to implement in the programming object also. In OOP programming language also, if we want to create an object, it should have these two characteristics, whether it is real world object or programming object, it is object. So it should have these two characteristics, state and behavior. Okay, so in object, in our OOP object, the state is implemented by means of attributes, by means of attributes. Okay, so that means the state of an object is defined with the help of attributes, and the behavior of the object is defined with the help of the functions in programming. Okay, so these attributes we call them as attributes, or we implement as a variables. So every object in programming will have these two features. Okay, so one is a set of variables which defines the state of the object, and a set of functions which defines the behavior of the object. Okay, so that's how an object is defined in object oriented programming. Okay, so it is taken from real world scenario, and the same thing implemented in programming. So that's what we can see the definition is. An object is a collection of data. Okay, so this data defines the state of the object. State of the object. Okay, so an object is a collection of data. So this data is implemented in the form of attributes or variables and methods. Okay, so methods are nothing but functions. These functions act on that data. So this is what called object in programming. Okay, so then how this object is created? Okay, so it is with the help of a class in programming. So a class is a blueprint, a template for creating the objects. Okay, so if you want to create or if you want to build a large complex, okay, so then what we do, first we'll prepare a blueprint. So the blueprint is nothing but a plan, okay, so which outlines the design and structure of the building. With the help of that blueprint, they construct the building. Okay, similarly here, for creating the objects, we first prepare a blueprint. Okay, so that blueprint is called a class. That means first we need to define this class. Okay, so this class defines every object, what kind of behavior or state it should have, and what kind of behavior it should have. Okay, so the class tells that the objects created from this class. Okay, so what are the state and behavior of those objects is defined by the class. That's why we call it as a blueprint. Okay, while an object is a specific instance of a class that holds the actual data. So object is, it is a instance of the class. Okay, so an instance of the class is called object, and that object actually stores the actual data. Okay, so what data here? We said that state is implemented with the help of variables. Okay, so the values for the variables will be stored in this object. Okay, so now we can say that every object, actually instead of two we can say three. Every object will have state, behavior, and a unique identity also. Every object will have a unique identity, like in real world every person has his own identity like his own unique Aadhaar card. Okay, in programming also every object is different from other objects. Okay, it will have a unique identity. Okay, so these three defines an object: state, behavior, and identity. These three defines an object in programming. So what is a class? How we can define a class? Okay, so a class is a user defined data type. You can also call it as a user defined data type that defines the structure and behavior. Okay, so structure and behavior of all objects that belongs to this class. Okay, so that will implemented with the help of attributes and methods. Okay, so that's how a class is defined. Okay, so what is the structure of the object and what is the behavior of the object? Okay, so that is defined with the help of attributes and methods, and when you group these two into a single entity, okay, then that is called as a class in object oriented programming language. Okay, so it is an abstract concept. This we should remember. A class is an abstract class concept. Okay, so that means physically it is not existing, it exists only as abstract. It is just like a specification. We can say that a class is a specification that defines the structure and behavior of all the objects related to that class. Okay, so it is an abstract concept that does not occupy memory. Since it is only a specification, so it will not have any memory occupied. Okay, so when it gets memory, when an object is created from that class, okay, then the object gets the memory. The object occupies the memory. Class does not have memory. This we should remember. Okay, so what are the key characteristics of a class? The class is defined using the class keyword. We use class keyword for defining. In Python, we have a keyword called as a class keyword. So using the class keyword, we define the class, and contains attributes implemented with the help of variables and methods. That means functions. Then it serves as a template for creating a multiple similar objects. All the objects created, okay, from this class will have similar structure and behavior. Similar structure and behavior. Okay, like say for example, if we take a tiger as a class, if we take tiger as a class, okay, so then all the tigers all the tigers belonging to this class. For example, assume a group of tigers. So tiger 1, tiger 2, tiger 3, tiger 4, like this. All the tigers will have same kind of a structure and a behavior. Okay, so what is the same kind of structure? That means every tiger will have same kind of a, say, color you can take. Okay, and behavior means every tiger hunts. Okay, hunting is their behavior. Okay, so all the tigers will have the same behavior like hunting. Yes or no? Okay, and they will have attributes like their color or number of legs, or you can define some more variables for that. Okay, so That is what it serves for creating multiple similar objects. Then what is an object? An object is called, also called as instance. Okay, so it is an instance and is a concrete realization of a class. Class is only a specification. Okay, so its concrete implementation is called object. Okay, so concrete implementation means when it gets memory. When something is present in memory, we call it as concrete object. Okay, so this object will have a memory occupied. Okay, so each object has its own unique set of data that it defines its state and can perform actions using the methods defined in its class. Okay, so those actions define the behavior, like tiger class. Okay, so the tiger's behavior is hunting. Okay, so that hunting defines their behavior. Then objects are the actual entities that are used in running a program. Okay, so class we use only for creating the objects. Okay, but the actual entities by which we perform actions or perform tasks in programming is with the help of objects only. For creating these objects, we define the class. So what are the key characteristics of object? Created from a class. Object must be created from a class. Okay, so it stores data unique to itself in instance variables. We will see this. Okay, so then occupies memory when created. Once the class is object is created from the class, then immediately memory is allocated for that object. It occupies the memory. That is called instantiation. Okay, so this is a simple syntax of a class name, then followed by statements. Okay, so generally these statements, two statements includes what are the things inside the class. It contains variables, or you can also call them as attributes, and functions. These two things will present inside this. That's how a class is defined. Okay, so let us define a simple class in Python. Okay, so we'll start writing a class in Python. So how we can define a class? Say for example, we want to define a class called as a student. We will define a class called as a student. So it should start with the class name, keyword called class, then followed by class name. Okay, so this is called a class name. You can give your own user defined name here. Okay, so if you are trying to implement a class for employee, then your class name become employee here. Okay, so then the keyword class followed by some class name, then followed by colon. In Python it should be followed by colon. Okay, then here we can define attributes and functions here. So what are the attributes generally a student will have? Okay, a student will have something like name and age, okay, and id. Okay, so those things you can define here, or simply you can put the keyword called as a pass. Okay, even without defining anything, you can create a empty class here. Okay, so this is how a class is created. Okay, so we will define the attributes. How the attributes can be written, we will see afterwards. Okay, right? So here what we do is we can create a object once the class. This is class definition, skeleton class definition. Okay, so once we create the class, now we can define objects for this class. Okay, so now I can say s1 is equals to, okay, then say student followed by parenthesis. Okay, so this creates the object. This creates the object. So what is the object here? S1 is called object. S1 is called object. Okay, so that means for S1 memory is allocated. Okay, this S1, and since there is no function and no variable present, okay, no variables and no functions, empty object is created like this. Now if you print S1, then it prints S1. It says that S1 is an object. S1 is an object. Got it? Okay, so let me show the execution of this. We'll go to online compiler. So let us write a simple class student, then followed by colon. Okay, so just I say pass. I will define variables and functions in future. Okay, so whenever you want to define something in future, you can use this keyword pass. Okay, so you cannot keep the body of the class empty. Instead of that, you keep it as a by using the keyword called as a pass. Okay, so now you create an object here s1 equals to, okay, so then student followed by parenthesis. This creates an object. Now I'll print the object what is present inside it. Okay, so if we run the code, now you can see student object is present at this address. So at this address the student object is created. Okay, so now I want to assign, after creating the object, say let me assign some value for the attributes. So I create an attribute called as a something like a name attribute. Okay, so this name must be invoked with the help of a object s1 object by using dot operator here. S1 dot name is equals to, okay, so something like I assign a name called as a Ramesh. Okay, so then I'll print the name here s1 dot name. Okay, so what happens here if we look at the uh, memory diagram? Okay, so if we look at the memory diagram of this, now here s1 object is created. Okay, so when you say name, then a attribute called as a name is created. Okay, and for this the value Ramesh will be stored inside this. The value Ramesh will be stored inside this. Okay, so now it creates an attribute called as name and the value will be stored. And please remember, it is part of this object s1 object. Okay, so whatever is present inside the object you must access by using the object name, using the object name called as a s1 only. S1 dot name, this gives the value Ramesh. That's how we access the members of the class by using dot operator. Okay, got it? So let us execute this and we'll see what it displays. Now when we execute this and when we run this, okay, so now you can see print s1 dot name Ramesh is printed here. Okay, similarly you can assign some more attributes like s1 dot, okay, so age is equals to 22. Then you can print his age s1 dot age, and if you run this, now you can see name and age values are printed here. Okay, but the drawback here is what we are doing, we have created initially, we have created an empty object. Okay, s1 object we created. Afterwards we are creating the attributes and assigning the values from outside the class. From outside the class, this is class. Okay, so this is outside the class. Okay, so but generally what we want to pass these values when the object is created. This statement creates the object. Okay, when this object is created, okay, so we want to pass those values and let the object gets their values during the creation itself. Okay, so for that purpose in other languages what we do is we use constructor. Okay, for initializing the objects we use the constructor. So when we create an object and we pass the values with the help of a constructor. Okay, so in Python, okay, so the constructor, that means it uses a special function. Constructor is a special function or special method which has same name as class name in other languages, but in Python, okay, so the constructor implemented has a special name called as underscore underscore init, then followed by underscore underscore, okay, followed by parenthesis. Here you can pass the values. Okay, so this is how we should define the constructor. Okay, so in Python, since constructor is also a function or method, it should be defined with the help of def keyword. Then here we can pass. Okay, so a special method is used in Python. This special method, init method, we call it as init method, is called constructor in Python. Okay, so what is the purpose of constructor? It constructs an object. That means when the object is created, then when this object is created, then all the values for the attributes will be assigned. Memory allocated for the object, and also the values for the attributes will be stored in that memory location. Got it? Okay, so this is how we want to create attributes and pass the values. Okay, so how we can do that? Instead of writing this pass here, okay, so now I define the class like this. Class, I say student. Okay, then I define a constructor. Okay, def underscore underscore init underscore underscore. Okay, and one more important thing is this constructor should have the first parameter called as a self. The first parameter called as a self. Okay, so this self parameter, okay, so it indicates that the current object. Okay, so it references to the current object which invoked this init method. Okay, so always please remember, inside the class, for all the methods, not only for init, for all the methods, the first parameter should be self. First parameter should be self. Okay, so then followed by what attributes you want to define for the students, then you can pass, you can get their values. Say for example, I want to get a student name. Okay, then a student age, assume, then id also I am getting. Okay, so these are the three values parameters I am getting. For the values for these three parameters I am getting when the object is created. Okay, so these three, name, age and id, now becomes the parameters for this init method. Okay, and all these parameters, there is no way of separately defining the attributes first then using them inside. Okay, whereas in Java what we do, first we define the variables or attributes first. Okay, then we use these attributes or variables inside the methods, inside the methods. Okay, but here in Python, directly in the init method, you can create the variables or attributes and directly assign their values here. Okay, so how you can assign their values? For example, for this student, how you are going to create an object for this student class, this is how you are creating. Now the statement changes. Okay, so now the object can be created like this. Okay, so after the class, now you can create the object like this: s1 equals to student, then followed by, now you pass these three values: name, age and id. Okay, so name is something like say Ramesh, then age, okay, so 22, then id is 101 id. Now this statement creates the object called as a student1, s1 object it creates. Okay, so these three values will be passed into this name, age, and ID parameters. Okay, so here you are getting the values. No, those values you should assign to the attributes. So the attributes you can directly write here. Okay, so the attribute should be defined like this: self dot name. Self dot name equals to this name. Okay, then self dot age equals to the age value you are getting here. Okay, so this age value you are getting, that you are assigning here. Okay, similarly self dot id equals to id. Okay, so this id. Now try to understand this left hand side names and right hand side names here. Okay, so the left hand side names, the left hand side name, age, id. Okay, so these three defines the attributes for the s1 object. Attributes for the s1 object. Okay, now see this statement. This is our main code. Now first this statement is executed. When this statement is executed, okay, so it creates an object called as s1. Okay, so then immediately what happens, student followed by parenthesis. No, this represents the constructor. This represents the constructor. That means you are trying to invoke the constructor. Constructor method is called here. Okay, so in Python, what is the name of the constructor method? Init method. Then the control comes to this init method. Okay, so it starts its execution. This init method starts its execution. Okay, so then Ramesh will be passed into this name, 22 will be passed into age, and 101 will be passed into this id. Okay, so this left hand side 3 name, age, id. Okay, so these three defines the attributes for this name, age, id. These are the three attributes of this s1 object. Okay, and when you say self dot name, see here. Okay, so what is self here? The current object. The current object. What is the current object here? s1 is the current object. Now see here, s1 is the current object. Okay, so for this object, now it is trying to assign the values for these three attributes: name, age, and id. Okay, so when it executes these three statements, self dot name, self dot name is nothing but, it is nothing but s1 dot name. Internally Python resolves this like s1 dot name. Okay, so s1 dot name is equal to name. What this name represents here? It represents the name called Ramesh. Okay, so then Ramesh will be assigned to this attribute name. So then here the value Ramesh will be stored for this attribute. Then self dot age is equal to age. Okay, so age is what here? This right hand side age represents this parameter here. Okay, so that value 22 will be stored into this age value. Okay, so that 22 will be assigned to age. So here the value 22 will be stored. Then next id is equal to self dot id is equal to id means this 101 will be passed into this parameter id. So that 101 will be stored here. So this is how the object is created internally. S1 object is created with this statement. Got it? Okay, so here what is happening here? When we create the object, or okay, so when we create the object, automatically the values are assigned here. Explicitly we have not assigned. Previously we have assigned like s1 dot name is equal to. Okay, but here with the help of constructor we are initializing the object. This is how the object is created with three attributes. In Python, please remember, no need to separately declare the attribute names. Inside the init method itself, you can give the names. Those names automatically defines the attributes for the object, S1 object. Now, if you create one more object like S2 is equals to student. Okay, so then another name. Okay, so like Suresh, then age 25. Okay, so then id 201. What happens? One more object is created like this. One more object is created. Okay, so this object name is called s2. Okay, again for this object also, because he is a separate person. Okay, so name, age and id. So again, this object will have value separator for these three variables or attributes here. Okay, so it will have the name value as Suresh, age value as a 25 and id value as a 201. Okay, so every object will have its own copy of these attribute values. Every object will have its own copy of these attribute values. Okay, so that's why inside the init method, whatever names, variable names we define, okay, they are called as, these are called as a instance variables. These are called as a instance variables. We call them as instance variables. Why instance? Because every instance will have its own copy. Every instance will have its own copy of values. Okay, so s1 will have name, age, id, and s2 will have name, age, id. Like different students have different name, age and ids in real world. Similarly, the programming objects also have their own copy of name, age and id values. Okay, so these variables, whatever we define, they are called as a instance variables. They are called as a instance variables. Got it? Okay. So this is how generally in Python we create objects with the help of a init method. And let us implement this, execute this, and let us see in online compiler whether it creates perfectly or not. Done. Okay. So class student. Now what I do, I define and you should follow the indentation here. Okay, so you should not type from the first column onwards. Okay, so all the statements inside the class must be typed with the indentation. Okay, so like this, def underscore underscore init underscore underscore. Okay, then the first argument parameter should be self. Then next I want to include name, age and id. Okay, so now you can assign the values. These things can be a different one also. Okay, I'll show you. Self dot name is equals to name, then self dot age is equals to age, then self dot id equals to id. Okay, so id, see there, name, age, color is white, but whereas this id color is yellow here. Okay, so that means it indicates that it is already a keyword or predefined name. Okay, so that's why it shows a different color for this, and we should not use such a predefined names. Sometimes it may give you some erroneous results. Okay, so better avoid, don't use predefined names for our variables. Okay, so just like I say that sid. Okay, so I call it as a sid, student id. Okay, so now this is perfect. So name, age and student id, it assigns these values. Now I create, instead of writing these two statements separately here, now directly inside the constructor, now you pass the values like name, first argument is name, then second argument is age and id is 101. Okay, so once the object is created, now you can access those class attributes with the help of a object only. So you should say s1 dot name, s1 dot age and s1 dot sid. Okay, so this is how you should access, only with the help of object followed by dot operator. Okay, so Ramesh 22101. Now you can see here. Okay, so one more student details if you want to store, then you can create a one more object here, like S2. Okay, so student, now you can say second student Suresh. Okay, so age something like 25 or something, and 201 is address. Now you can print the details, second student details here. Okay, so S2 dot name, then S2 dot age, and S2 dot SID. Now when you print, you can see student 1 and student 2 details. Okay, so that means every object will have its own instance variable, set of instance variables. Got it? Right? Now you may have a doubt that the first argument is self. Okay, so is it the same word we should use, or can we use our own name here? Okay, so we can use your own name. Okay, say like CLS class I am using here. Okay, but here whatever name, that means the first argument, whatever name you use, is a reference to the current object. Please remember. Okay, it represents the reference to the current object. Okay, it need not be the word self. You can use some other name also. Okay, but it is always a reference to the current object. Okay, so you should say that cls dot name, then you should say here cls dot age, and you should say cls dot sid. Okay, so now if you run this, you can see the output. Okay, so no matter whether you use the word self or some other name. Okay, it is not a keyword here. It is not compulsory that only. Okay, but it is better. Okay, it is better, and the common programming practice is using the word called as self. Okay, so the self itself represents that it is the current object. That's why people use the word called as a self. Okay, so better follow the same convention when you write the program. Okay, but asked in interview, you should say that we can also use some other name. Got it? Like, now this is one method I have defined. Okay, so along with this you can also define some other methods. Okay, like say for example, I want to define one more uh, now see, instead of what I am doing here, I am trying to access these name, age, and sid. Okay, outside the class I am trying to print. Okay, so instead of that, if you define a method for this. Okay, so say for example, show name method you define here. Okay, so this show name method displays a name. Okay, so like say for example, print, it prints like name value, it prints. Okay, so comma, but now see here, this is inside the class. Okay, so inside the class, if you want to access this attribute, okay, so it must be written as a self dot name only. Okay, so inside the class you should use self dot name. Okay, so this prints the name of the current object, name of the current object. Okay, so if s1 is the current object, student 1 name, it prints student 1 name, it prints. Similarly, we can define another function for displaying okay, so like his age. Okay, so now you can say show age function we will define. So then you can print um, like age value you want to print. Okay, so age, we use the same convention. Okay, so age name here we'll print, then comma. How we can access age attribute? Self dot age. Okay, so then similarly you define a method for displaying student id. Okay, so sid, then say print student id. Okay, so sid value you can print here, comma self dot sid. Got it? Okay, so now no need to use this print statement here. Okay, so you can just call the methods. Okay, like s1 dot okay, so show name. Okay, student one name you want to display, just call the method. Similarly s1 dot okay, show age. Then similarly s1 dot show student id. These methods if you call, then the methods internally access these attributes and prints them. Okay, now you can see here. Yeah, now you can find out the error here. Okay, so what is the error? Student dot show name takes 0 positional arguments, but one was given. Okay, so that means you are trying to use a positional argument self dot age you are using here. Okay, but this argument, one argument is not passed. Okay, so that means every method inside the class, okay, should have at least one parameter that is called self, the first parameter. And if it is only one parameter, and that parameter should be self, you cannot keep them empty, you cannot keep them empty. Okay, so that is what the uh, error is. Now if I run the code, now you can see. Okay, so name Ramesh, it has printed age and sid. That means these three methods are invoked and using the s1 object. Similarly, if you want to print a second student details, okay, so again you can use, you can call these methods. Okay, s2 dot show name, s2 dot show age, and s2 dot show id. Now if you run, now it prints here. Okay, so name, age, sid, student 1 details. Okay, so these are student 2 details. So if you want to add some print message here, like a header you want to add. Okay, so student 1 details, some header if you want to add, you can add a header here. Similarly, you can use header for this so that it is very clear to you. So student to details, like this you can add the headers and you can print. Now you can see student 1 details, student 2 details, like this. Okay, so in Python this is how we create objects. Okay, and we use attributes for defining the state of the object, and we use methods to define the behavior of the objects. Okay, so here the behavior is like show name, show age, and show student id. Done? No. So one other important uh, thing that we should know about class variables. Okay, so variables are attributes. Okay, or attributes are two types. In Python we have two types of attributes inside the class. Okay, so inside a class, okay, so we have variables or attributes are two types of attributes we'll have. One is called as a class attributes, class attributes, and the second one is called as a instance attributes. Instance attributes. Okay, so instance attributes we have seen. Okay, that means every instance will have its own copy of a attribute. Say for example, this is a object 1. Okay, so object 1 will have its own copy of instance variables. Object 2 will have its own copy of instance variables. Okay, these attributes are called, that's why they are called instance. Every instance will have its own copy of values. Okay, whereas another kind of attributes that is called as class attributes. Okay, so class attributes related to the class, related to entire class. It is related to the entire class. Okay, so that's why all the objects will have single copy of a class variable. Okay, so it is common to, this is common to all the objects. Okay, so class attribute is common to all the attributes, common to all the, sorry, common to all the objects. Okay, so that means object 1 will have the same attribute, object 2 also will have the same attribute value. Okay, such attributes are called as class attributes, which are common to all the objects. Okay, then how to define these called class attributes? We have seen defining the instance attributes. Instance attributes are variables are defined inside the init method. Okay, whereas class attributes are defined outside. Okay, like say for example, we have defined a class called as a student class. We have defined student class we have defined. Okay, like I define a attribute or a variable called as a college name. College name attribute I define. Okay, then I define a college name as a something like a ABC college. ABC college. Okay, and this is called as a class variable. This is called as a class variable or class attribute. You can call it as. Okay, that means if a variable is defined outside of all the methods, including init method. After this, we define the init method. After this, we define the init method. Got it? Okay, then we define other methods like show age, show name. So this kind of attributes which are defined inside the class outside of all the methods, such variables or attributes are called as class attributes. And these class attributes are, what are their characteristics? Common to all the objects. Common to all the objects, only one copy of memory is available, but whereas instance variables will have its own copy. In each object it will have own copy of a memory. Okay, but here for class attributes only one memory will be allocated, which is common to all the objects. Okay, because all the objects, all the students belong to the same college name. You cannot create a college name in every object. You can create, but if you create, what happens? Every time you are unnecessarily storing an extra variable. 100 students are there, 100 times you are storing the same name, duplication, wasting your memory. Okay, so for such common attributes we can define these class attributes. These are called as class attributes in Python. Okay, so let us define a class attributes and let us see how we can use those class attributes. Like say for example, we'll go to our online compiler. Okay, so let me show this. So here outside of all this, okay, so I just create a class attribute called as college name is equal to, okay, so some ABC college, some ABC college. So how memory is allocated for this? It is allocated only once, and it is available to all the objects. It is common to all the objects. Okay, so now if you want to uh, print the college name also for this student, okay, so then what you can do is you can define a method, one more method here. Okay, so called as def. Okay, so def show college name, show college name method you can define here. Okay, one argument called as a self here. Okay, so inside this now you print the college name. Okay, so like this, say for example college name, college name. Okay, then comma, here you should access it by using the self only. Okay, so self dot, or you can also access this class variable by using this class name. Okay, now uh, what we do is this self indicates the current object. No, okay, so since it is common to all, now we should access it by using the college class name here. Okay, so student is our class name, student dot. Okay, so what is the name of that class variable? College name. Okay, so then say college underscore name. Okay, so like this you can define a method for printing the college name here. Now you can just access this. Now here outside the class you can access it by using any object name. Okay, so s1 dot say show underscore, since it is a method, college name, show college name is a method. Okay, so we call it by using the object called as s1 dot college name, student 1 college name it displays. Okay, so similarly if you want to display second student college name, which is same, see here I am calling the same method but with s2. Okay, so if I run this, now you can see student 1 college name is ABC college, student 2 college name, student 1 college name is ABC, student 2 college name is also ABC, both belongs to the same college. No, okay, so this way we can create class variables which are common to all the objects, whereas instance variables, these are called instance variables, name, age and sid. Okay, and each instance will have their own copy here. Each object will have own copy of these instance variables, like name, age and sid values. Okay, so I'll show the diagrammatic representation of class variables here. Okay, so let us look at the diagrammatic representation. Now if we see, now s1 s2, these are called instance variables. Okay, whereas if you create the college name attribute, okay, so that college name attribute will be created outside of all the objects. Okay, so this is college name attribute, this is the college name attribute. Okay, so here this ABC college value will be stored here. Okay, and memory is allocated only once. See here, for instance variables in s1 there is a memory for name, age, id. For s2 there is a memory for name, age and id. Instance variables, no, each instance will have its own memory. Okay, but whereas class variable will have only one copy of memory. Okay, now s1 can access this and s2 can access this, s2 can also access this. Okay, it is common to all the objects. When you want to maintain a common variable for all the objects, okay, so then we use the class variables. When then we define the class variables. Okay, so our class attributes we define. Got any doubts? Because for creating linked list for implementing complex data structures like single linked list, double linked list, trees and graphs. We should implement them in the form of objects. Okay, so for that you need to know defining the class and creating the objects. So that's all for today's session. So in this session we discussed classes and objects in Python. Okay, how classes are created in Python. Okay, and how classes are defined in Python, and from that how objects are created using the class definition. Okay, so and we have seen the two different types of variables or attributes that can be defined inside the class. One is called class attribute and other are called as a instance attributes. Class attributes belongs to the entire class. Okay, so there will be only single copy of these class variables common to all the objects, whereas instance variables are separate. Each in instance or each object will have their own copy of these instance variables or attributes. Separate memory will be allocated in the each object for this. So thank you one and all. If you found this video useful, so please like and share this video. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe to the channel and also turn on the bell icon for such a more programming notifications and updates. So thank you one and all.